Right now, in a province most Americans couldn't find on a map, there is a hole in the earth the size of a small city. It doesn't have a Twitter account. No senator has mentioned it this week. It will not appear on tonight's news. But if you drove an electric vehicle to work this morning, if you charged a Tesla, a Rivian, a Chevy Bolt, you are directly connected to what happens inside that hole. Before we go into the mine, I need to show you something that your EV salesperson did not put in the brochure. The battery in an electric vehicle requires cobalt, not a little cobalt, a meaningful amount. And more than 70% of the world's cobalt comes from a single country, the Democratic Republic of Congo. That number alone is striking. But here's where the geography gets darker. Of that Congolese cobalt, the overwhelming majority is not processed in Congo. It's not processed in the United States. It travels almost entirely to China, where Chinese state-linked companies refine it, control it, and sell it back to American automakers. Let me say that plainly. The United States government is simultaneously calling China its greatest geopolitical threat and buying the core mineral of its clean energy policy from Chinese-controlled supply chains. That is not an opinion. That is the documented geography of where your car battery comes from. The Copperbelt is one of the most mineral-rich strips of land on Earth. It runs roughly 280 miles from the southern DRC into northern Zambia. For most of the 20th century, Western mining companies, Belgian, British, American, extracted its wealth. Then came independence, then civil war, then something that changed the map permanently. Beginning in the early 2000s, Chinese state-backed enterprises began acquiring mining rights across the Copperbelt at a scale that Western companies simply weren't competing with. By 2020, Chinese entities controlled the majority of the DRC's largest cobalt operations. There are two kinds of cobalt mining happening in the DRC. The first is industrial, large pits operated by heavy machinery, officially permitted, employing tens of thousands. The second is called artisanal. Artisanal sounds romantic. It is not romantic. Artisanal miners, and this includes children, dig by hand into unstable tunnels. They carry ore in sacks on their backs. The pay is roughly $2 a day. Exposure to cobalt dust causes lung disease. Tunnel collapses kill people regularly. The UN has documented this. The State Department has documented this. American automakers have acknowledged it in their own ESG reports. And then the ore enters the supply chain. And by the time it reaches the battery in a vehicle sold at a dealership in Ohio, it is indistinguishable from ore that came from a fully automated industrial site. Here is where the geography becomes strategically dangerous, not just morally uncomfortable. China doesn't just mine cobalt in the DRC, China refines it, China processes it into battery-grade material, China manufactures the battery cells. In many cases, China assembles the battery packs. The United States, as of 2024, has zero commercial-scale cobalt refining capacity. Zero. This is not a Trump or Biden issue. This geographic vulnerability was built over 2 administrations, and every administration since has pledged to fix it. The Inflation Reduction Act includes provisions to address it. The critical minerals list includes cobalt. Billions in subsidies have been announced. And yet, as of today, the mine in Kolwezi is still majority controlled by Chinese entities. The refining still happens in China, and the EVs are still selling. Now here is the part that nobody in Washington wants to talk about in the same sentence. The United States government, across both parties, has made electric vehicles the centerpiece of its climate and energy independent strategy. The Inflation Reduction Act allocated over $370 billion for clean energy. A significant portion of that is EV incentives. The law includes a provision requiring that to qualify for the full $7,500 tax credit, a percentage of the EV's battery minerals must come from the US or from free trade agreement countries. The DRC is not a free trade agreement country. China is explicitly not eligible. So what did the Treasury Department do? It issued guidance that, in practice, allowed automakers significant flexibility in meeting these requirements during a transition period. The result: American consumers received tax credits subsidized by American taxpayers to buy vehicles whose batteries still depended on Chinese-controlled cobalt from the DRC. The government knew, the automakers knew, the environmental groups knew, and the incentives went out anyway. That red dot is about 8,000 miles from the nearest Tesla dealership, but they are connected by a supply chain that your government built, subsidized, and still hasn't fixed. I want to be clear about something before we finish. Electric vehicles are, by most credible measurements, better for the climate than internal combustion engines. That is not in dispute here. What is in dispute is the story that was told alongside them, the story that this was a clean break, a fresh start, energy independence, because independence implies you control the supply chain. And right now, the United States does not control the supply chain. China does, and China controls it from a country that has one of the most unstable political environments on Earth. There are efforts to change this. American companies are investing. Legislation has passed. Australia, Canada, and Zambia are being cultivated as alternative sources. The map is slowly shifting, but slowly is a word that matters, because in the meantime, every EV sold with a government subsidy is a small data point in a very large geographic dependency that nobody put on the showroom floor. The mine in Kolwezi doesn't care what you drive. It doesn't care who wins the next election. It cares that the world still needs what's inside it. The question, the one nobody in Washington is answering clearly, is who controls that mine when the world needs it most?